Okay, and welcome to one of our earliest videos for MS 100 Online. And I wanted to take a little bit as you're starting to get comfortable and getting introduced to the Excel program to talk to you about cell referencing, specifically absolute versus relative versus mixed cell referencing. It is imperative that you understand the concept of cell referencing in order to get the most out of Excel. And without understanding cell references, pretty much all Excel will be to you is a really fancy calculator. So I want to dive right in and talk to you a little bit about cell referencing and what makes it so special when dealing with Excel worksheets. So we talked about how Excel was invented. We talked about how it evolved from visible calculator, aka VisiCalc, into what it is today. And what I want to introduce to you before you jump in and start writing functions and formulas and doing all these cool things is how you navigate actually referencing or using the cells inside Excel. Okay. So here are some things that we know already. Excel files are called workbooks. Inside those workbooks, you have worksheets. The first page that you're looking at right now is called Battleship on our worksheet. Okay, so here's one worksheet inside the workbook called Excel Day 1, Day 2. The second page or the second sheet is called Business Problem 1. So the whole thing is a workbook. This is a worksheet. This is a worksheet. Okay, so now we jump into the cells of what makes Excel Excel. Okay, so the cells of the worksheets are actually where you can enter your data. It's where all of your actual information is going to come from. Okay, so here is how that is organized. Okay, inside an Excel worksheet, you have columns that go across the top. These are the columns, and you have rows that go vertically up and down. So columns are horizontal, rows are vertical. Columns are alpha, are letters, okay? So columns going across left to right are going to be alphabetical. Rows going up and down vertically are going to be numerical, okay? So it's if you take the column letter and the row number, so for example, F2, and you just click, that's going to give you a very specific cell. And that's how you identify where your data is, okay? So for example, H2, okay? Or C10. Now, before we jump into more complicated things that deal with cell referencing, before you hopefully start to feel overwhelmed, let me remind you, for most of you, that you have done or seen something like this before in a very, very popular children's game here in the United States called Battleship. Hopefully, you've all played Battleship before. If we had a face-to-face class of MS 100, I would let you play Battleship in class. It's a lot of fun. But more importantly, it works the exact same way that references work in Excel. So if you were working inside an Excel workbook, so for example, like this one, and you wanted to isolate how much money Dina sold for the first quarter, for example, well, her sales for the first quarter is in cell B2. Okay, B2. And you always want to open up with the letter, then follow with the number. Now, before we do that, though, let's just go back to that old school game of Battleship. And I'm going to take a second. I'm going to let you try it on your own. Take a look at the yellow battleship in the upper left-hand corner. Okay? If I wanted you to sync that battleship, and I'll make it really easy for you. If I wanted you to tell me the cell coordinate to sync that battleship, you take a second, you tell me what it is. I will count to 5 and wait for you. All right. Now, I have been teaching MS 100 for a long time now, and I will tell you that no one has ever let me down. Every single time we've done this in our face-to-face class, there's always been someone to sync my battleship. So hopefully you told me if you wanted to sync the yellow battleship that you were going to sync by typing in cell C4. Perfect. Column C, row 4. Okay? So that's the first thing I want to point out to you. C4. Now, let's jump to our next problem and talk about how cell referencing really works out well for you. Okay? How it really works out well. So here's what we know. We know that Excel can be used as a calculator. So for example, if I type equals 2 plus 2, it's going to tell me 4. Okay? Now, here's what's going to be different about this. And by the way, don't be alarmed as you work through this problem if you choose to. Notice that the numbers here are changing. That is by design because every month or every quarter or every year that you do projected values with whatever business you're doing, those numbers are going to change. And it shouldn't matter if the numbers change how your business processes work. So I like to set worksheets up that way when you're in class to mimic a real live dynamic business situation. So let's talk about sales a little bit. Sales is an interesting business, and oftentimes it works off of commission. Okay, sales often works off commission. So, for example, let's say that each one of these sales reps makes 15% commission. Well, I could jump right in and I could just start doing the math, right? So I get the 346 times 15%, for example, and we could make that work. Okay, it's going to say that this guy gets $51.09 in commission for that sale, whatever that may be. Now that's all well and good, but hey, take a look at this for a second. Interesting. So if I'd use my quick stats, actually, let's see here. There are 31 people in this worksheet that have reported some kind of sale that needs to get commission. So, that's a lot of work for you to go through and manually calculate commission, right? A lot of work. Okay. So instead of doing that, let's take advantage of what makes Excel so great. Instead of us just writing a manual calculation, why don't we use some cell referencing to really make this thing work? So instead of me typing, hey, notice that the numbers changed. Now let's say this is the next month, and Dina has done much better and sold $620 worth of merchandise. Okay. Instead of me typing equals 620 times 15%, which would absolutely work, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say we're going to take whatever Dina sells and we're going to multiply that by the commission rate. And you know what that's going to do? It's going to tell me 3210. Now notice that number changed again. No big deal. Okay? They're going to do that. What you need to understand is that your system is always working. Okay? So now here's what we've done here. Instead of typing in raw data, straight hard-coded numbers here, we have used what's called a relative cell reference. So instead of typing in 214 times 15%, I have said whatever's in the cell value of B2, so whatever's in B2, multiplied by whatever's in F2. This gives me significantly more flexibility because now as my numbers change, my number value for the bonus will change with it. It's become dynamic. It is imperative that you understand that. Now, that being said, I have to do something special in order to keep this working because Excel will actually auto-complete this for me. I can use Excel to complete this entire column without me having to go through and do it 30 more additional times. Now, to do that, I'm going to use something called the fill handle. Now, the fill handle has been right in front of you this entire time. It is this little green dot. You see it right there? I'm circling it with my pointer here. That little green dot is called the fill handle. Now, this is really, really important for you to understand what the fill handle does. The fill handle adds 1 to any relative reference. So just let me show you, because this is confusing at first. See, I've got B2 times F2, okay? So if I take the fill handle and I move it down, it's going to copy this down. But notice that it's not correct. It's not correct right now because what it did was it just added 1 to what we had before. So it was B2 times F3, and now it became B3 times F3, okay? Now what's in cell F3? Nothing. But it added 1 to both of those, which is why we have that, okay? So it was B2 times F2. Now, this is my trick. If I double click, completed the whole thing. Now it's currently not correct, but let's just look at it to see what it did, okay? B3 times F3. So this is B2. That's going to be B3 times F3. This will be B4 times F4, B5 times F5, and you see what's happening? It's just going down. Now that is an awesome thing once you master how this works. Okay, so let me clear that out. Oops, delete. Clear that out and talk about how we can make this thing do what we want it to do. Okay, so a relative reference, the basics, just like in your book. A relative reference is a reference to a cell that will change when the fill handle is used. Okay, that's what you're using right now is a relative reference. The reason it didn't work, the reason when I used that fill handle to copy our formula, to reproduce it, is because of this cell, F2. See F2 over here? It's that 15% commission. All right. F2 is what we would call in a formula a constant. That commission rate doesn't change. So when we copy this formula down, the column C, we don't want F2 to change. We want F2 to stay exactly where it is. So we want it to be B2 times F2, then B3 times F2, and B4 times F2, and B5 times F2. No big deal. In order to do that, we simply change the cell F2 to an absolute reference. And we do that by hitting F4 on our keyboard. Now, hopefully you've read about this in the book already. If not, please do. It's in chapter 1 and it is very, very important. So I'm going to zoom in to talk to you a little bit about it. See, when I hit the F4 key on my keyboard, instead of you just having the regular reference of F2, which is what that would be, okay, it becomes this. It takes those dollar signs and it puts a dollar sign before the F and a dollar sign before the 2. What you've done is you've changed the relative reference of cell F2 to something in Excel that's called an absolute reference. Okay? Absolute references are constants. And when you have an absolute reference and you use the fill handle, that reference never changes. Okay? So let me show you what I mean. If I'd use the fill handle, hey, look at that. It worked because now it's B2 times F2, B3 times F2, B4 times F2, B5 times F2. Okay. Now on top of that, I want to take a moment to go a little bit farther. So first, the lesson here. Okay. When you have a constant and you want to use the fill handle, which is what I just did. See, this little thing's called the fill handle. If you want that constant to not change when you use the fill handle, because the fill handle adds 1 to every relative reference, you need to make the reference that you want to be a constant an absolute. And you do that by hitting F4 on your keyboard or by simply typing a dollar sign before the column letter and a dollar sign before the row number. And that makes that a constant. It freezes it. Now let's talk business practice for a second. Okay? In business, this is a great way to be efficient and it's just practical. Because let's say that we take an economic upswing, the company starts doing very well. And next month, instead of offering a 15% commission, you want to offer a 30% commission. Well, if you just manually typed in, because you know I could do this, I could just type in 15% right here, and that would work. But if I type in 15% and then the numbers change next month, I have to go in and edit those, and I'll have to do it for every single one, so all 30 of these. Or if I use relative and absolute referencing, I just go to where it says commission 15%, I make it 30%, hey, done. How much time did that take? Probably not even a full second. So here's what I ask of you, because this does take practice. First of all, as we leave this video, takeaways, please read chapter 1 in your textbook. It will talk a lot about relative, absolute, and something called mixed cell references, which you're probably not quite ready for yet. What I will leave you with is it is very important to master referencing in Excel. You never want to use raw numbers. If you do that, it's the equivalent of just using Excel like a calculator. So you want to learn to love to use relative and absolute cell references, okay? There's a lot of practice for you with this. It's pretty much all we'll do the entire class. Again, as always, please feel free to call me, email me, stop by my office, send me a Skype, whatever you need to do. I love to hear from you guys if you have any questions at all. Till then, signing off. I'll see you again soon.